Okay, good evening. First, we want to thank all of you for coming tonight. My name is Julie Shaw, and I'm part of Decoding Dyslexia Missouri. I see a lot of familiar faces out here. We just want to get a raise of hands. How many people here are a parent? You're here as a parent? Perfect. Teachers? All right. Administration? Perfect. Well, Decoding Dyslexia Missouri is a group that was started. It's a grassroots movement. As you probably know, it's through all the states. But we really focus, it's a parent group, and we focus on educating parents. Our theme is educate, advocate, and legislate. So that's our goal. And so today we are fortunate to have Ms. Kim Stuckey with us. I have to read her bio. I couldn't memorize it. Prior to joining DESE in the spring of 2016, Kim Stuckey received a bachelor's degree in social work and a master's degree in education counseling from University of Missouri. She spent her early career in behavioral health counseling children, adolescents, families, and groups. She became interested in dyslexia when her oldest son began to struggle early in elementary school. After training in dyslexia assessment and structured literacy remediation, she spent 11 years working with students of all ages and stages of their educational careers. She continues to oversee operations at a dyslexia center in her hometown. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to apologize right off the bat because I have a cold, so I can't hear myself very well, and I'm probably going to have to step away if my sinuses take over. So can everybody hear me? Super. I like that there's a group, parents and teachers. That's super exciting. It's been a busy couple years at the department, and we're going to get into some of the characteristics of dyslexia, which I hope will be beneficial for the educators out there. Maybe it'll be confirming for some of the parents that are there. And then we'll talk about some of the science behind the reading and the mandate that went into effect this fall. So again, those are the things that we're going to cover tonight. The myths and the science characteristics will start in early childhood and move up through high school. The mandate, which includes screening, universal screening, K through 3. And then we'll see how things go in 6:15. Talk a little bit about sports and accommodations. We want to give you time to network and chat with each other before you go, and as well as have some Q&A. So this is where my story begins. This is my oldest son, who just turned 23. And for those of you who raised your hand and were parents out there, I had that moment when his first grade teacher said to me, I think it would be a really good idea if Dylan went to summer school. And I thought, well, why would he need to do that? As far as we knew, everything was going as planned. But there's that meme, and it works its way around the dyslexia socials quite often, but it says a worried parent, I think it says a worried mother, so no offense to you dads out there, but a worried mother does better research than the FBI. Yeah, so that was that moment that I had to become that parent. And, it was a long and arduous journey, and it still continues because, once dyslexic, always dyslexic. But, I talk a lot about him and, the process of getting him through school and, of course, through the back door, having to, deliver the bad news to my husband that not only was Dylan dyslexic, but so are you. So, yeah, that took about 5 years to really get him used to. So I talk a lot about them because, again, this is an ongoing journey for us. So we need to talk about the definition of dyslexia, and this is what is mirrored in our state code. And I think it's important, and I put the italics in there, but it's important to highlight a few things because they really inform what's the underlying cause here and where those gaps are for our students. Neurobiological. Just like my son has dyslexia, my husband has dyslexia, this comes from somewhere. These are born with these characteristics. This is in our genetic makeup. Characterized by difficulties with accurate and fluent word recognition, poor spelling, and decoding, which is a result of a deficit in the phonological component of language. I was doing a training a couple weeks ago at a school district with K through 3 teachers, and maybe I'm not going to tell this joke because we're being recorded, never mind. Difficulties are unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities in the provision of effective classroom instruction. Everybody's going to wonder now when they watch this what I was going to say. When we turn the recorder off, I'll mention it. Unexpected. I think this is a really important thing to look at. Unexpected. We have children, students that are in all other capacities bright, maybe exceptionally bright compared to their peers. And there's this one area, this one weakness that they have, their reading, writing, and spelling. It just isn't commensurate with the rest of their abilities. And that all the fallout, secondary consequences including reading problems with reading comprehension, reduced reading experience, and that slows down their vocabulary, background growth, knowledge. So I think this is a really nice graphic because we know that speech takes place in one part of our brain. Reading, however, does not. All of the areas that are in this graphic have to, in essence, talk to each other, communicate with each other simultaneously, instantaneously, and without pause or delay to tackle the job of reading. That's pretty overwhelming. And think about all of these connections and situations that have to take place. And when do we want our kids to learn how to read? The biggest job their brain will ever do. We want them to do this when they're, what, 5? Yeah, 5. Wow, that's a big job. So what we also know about our dyslexic students is that they don't have these connections. If they do, they're not very well formed. I heard an analogy was that skilled readers take the highway, maybe even take the express route, where dyslexic students take the back road, and it's filled with potholes and windy turns and uphill. So it's really not as efficient for them. But a lot of our most of our dyslexic kiddos do their language processing in this Broca's area, in this frontal lobe on the left hemisphere, which is really inefficient. They overactivate their right hemisphere, so they're really taking a long path to get those tasks done. So our inputs here, our visual inputs, that's where we read. We input visually, but that's not where we store things. I think that's pretty fascinating to think about. And I'm going to take a little segue here for just a second, because the place where we store our visual recognition, like if I store your face somewhere so that I recognize you the next time that I see you, I store that in a different place than I store phonological data. So your words are stored phonologically in a different place in your brain. So I might recognize a street, or I recognize a sign when I go down the street. Oh, that's Target. Oh, there's McDonald's. It's not the same place where you store your language, where you store your phonological input. Really fascinating. So the myth out there that our students with dyslexia see things backwards. Well, it would, to someone who may not understand dyslexia, that would be really obvious, because they say things like was for saw, or they transpose their letters and say spot for stop, or something like that. But this is a really nice graphic that represents how our brain manipulates things. This is something that our brain does naturally. We can manipulate something in three-dimensional space, and we know that it retains its identity. It's got a fancy name called symmetry recognition. So what happened is that when we decided to alphabetize our language thousands of years ago and start writing things down, we had to suppress that, what our brain naturally did, because no longer was the shape the same when we manipulated it in space. So we had to suppress something that our brain was doing naturally, and this comes easier to some of us than others. Myth out there that if you're bright, you should be able to read, right? I mean, but really that's not necessarily the case. We have some very, very bright students. We have some brilliant folks out there. Famous dyslexics that we could talk about this entire time, people like Picasso and Muhammad Ali and Cher and Steven Spielberg and Henry Winkler, Richard Branson, the list goes on and on. Very, very, very bright people who've done amazing things, but didn't learn to read very well. Students just need a lot more practice. Oh my goodness. If I had a dime for every time we went home and did 20 more minutes of reading, thinking that that was going to help. Or just sound it out, honey, it's okay, just sound it out. Practice doesn't make perfect if we don't know the code. We really have to teach our kids that code. Who's tried to learn a foreign language? Raise your hand. Foreign language. Hard, right? Really, really difficult. And I think that that's a really great analogy. To someone who doesn't understand the code, how are you going to decipher? How are you going to get meaning out of that text? How are you going to get that print off the page if no one taught you the code? Even if you only had a few symbols, like maybe, you know, in the Greek alphabet, if you had 4 or 5 symbols, how well would you do? That would be overwhelming. And spending more and more time in that text with that Greek, would that really, would you be able to get some meaning from that? Probably not. Dyslexia affects more boys than girls. Statistically, I don't think that that's quite right. We've got about an equal showing of girls and boys with dyslexia. What happens with our boys, though? It's a lot easier. Go ahead. They act out because it's a lot easier to be bad than stupid. They'd much rather be known as being the naughty kid or the bad kid than to be the one who doesn't get it. Students will eventually outgrow dyslexia. Now, once dyslexic, always dyslexic. I've talked to a lot of adults who say, oh yeah, I used to be dyslexic. But think about that. Our kids learn very, very early on how to compensate, how to get the workarounds, figure out the ways to get things done that are a little bit different than somebody else might, so they don't necessarily look dyslexic to their peers. Talk about characteristics. Characteristics of dyslexia start to show themselves very early on. I did a little digging, some research to try to find out how many kiddos who were in early speech therapy for articulation concerns later were identified as dyslexic, and really couldn't find a lot of research. One study that I read said about 40%. So this is where our speech and language pathologists, do we have any speech and language pathologists in the room? Oh, you guys are the missing link. You know so much about this phonological awareness, and that development is really, really crucial. You're a very important player on this team. So thank you for being here. So delayed speech. Now, our kiddos, all kids with speech difficulties are dyslexic. All dyslexic kids don't have speech difficulties. We have to be very careful about those things. But when you have a little kiddo who's having some articulation concerns, can't discriminate some of those sounds, and what 3-year-old doesn't say cute things like aminal and biscotti and hecalopter and lawnmower and flutterby and zariba and all those wonderful things? It's adorable, right? But when you can't discriminate those sounds and correct those errors, that's when we have to be concerned. I have a friend whose daughter's dyslexic. She's an adult now, and she had a whole litany of things that she used to call flutterby, zariba. She was afraid of wapas because they would bite you, and all of those things, which again were adorable, but we weren't picking up on that when she was younger. Mixing up sounds and syllables, that's that. And that's something that kind of persists into adulthood, I think, sometimes. My husband persistently mispronounces words. I should find my phone because he made up a word the other day. I'm truly made up a word the other day. He says consonants. You know, you should really play Words with Friends with a dyslexic adult. It's really fun. It's really fun. Late establishing a dominant hand. What's that about? So we've got these kiddos that overactivate that right hemisphere. They can't quite figure out which hand to use. So, when they get a little older, they might be quite good at playing the piano, use both their hands, switch it in baseball, play soccer, kick really well with both their feet. So they overactivate that right hemisphere, and they can't quite figure out which hand to use sometimes. Trouble learning colors, letters, numbers. That rote memorization is such a challenge. We start with the ABCs, right? And it's just a random string of letters. Somebody just decided that was the order. How am I supposed to remember that? How am I supposed to do that? Colors, numbers, my address, my middle name. Oh, what a challenge that is. Our dyslexic kiddos just can't remember how to spell their middle names, no matter how much we yell at them. Use all 3 of their names. Difficulty seeing patterns in words. So that's that phonological awareness, that they don't pick up on those consistent letter strings that we have in our language. Our language is very consistent in the way we spell things. There are sequences that are just not acceptable in English, and our kids can't really find those. Unable to recognize the letters in their own name. Difficulty attaching labels to objects. So what's the name of that? I always say that I live in a world of thingies and whatchamacallits. So you can't remember what that thing is called. Where's my stuff? What do you mean, where's my stuff? What stuff do you mean? Trouble following directions or sequencing. Multistep directions, these are your kiddos. So it's middle of October, right? We've been in school for a good 2.5, almost 3 months. You've got that kiddo who still doesn't have the morning routine down. You've been doing the same thing every single day. He still forgets to do one thing. She forgets to, make her lunch choice before you turn in your homework. The rest of the kids have got it. They got it the second. They got it by the third day. These kiddos are still struggling with that sequence. Telling time and time shoes. Multiple steps, right? A sequence of steps that we have to go through. Anytime there's more than 3 or 4 of those, that's going to be a challenge. My son was in the 2nd grade. He had an amazing teacher. She had a special needs adult child, and so she was so good at getting to know her students and figuring out what their strengths were. And she called me one day to share a story with me. And she said, I was giving directions today, and there were four things that the kids had to do. And Dylan did one, came back. He said, I'm really sorry, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do next. And so she gave him the next 3 steps. And he went, and he came back. And he said, I'm really sorry, I need to know what I'm supposed to do next. And she sent him away again with the last 2, and he came back again the 3rd time, and he said, I'm really sorry, I have short-term memory loss. True story. So, he started to embrace some of those things very early on, some of them not so easily. Confusion with directionality. This is a joke when we're adults, right? Turn left, no, the other left. But there's all kinds of directions that we need our kids to know. We need to know left and right, and we need to know over and under, and we need to know yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and first and last, and before and after, and over and under. Oh my goodness, so many different directions that are involved. And it's all so confusing for kids. I had a teacher tell me just last week she was, the kiddos had alphabet strips on their tables, and she said, I can't remember what task they were doing, but she said, place whatever it was, the paper underneath your alphabet strip. Well, he kept trying to slide it underneath her alphabet strip. So below, under, and the way we use our terms isn't always necessarily consistent. So he was trying to put it under. He was absolutely following directions. Tying shoes, so challenging. Several steps that have to be done in the perfect sequence to be successful. You got 6th graders on your playground and you're still tying their shoes? Have to think a little bit about that. Again, confusion with directionality. Eventually we put kids in cars, right? Yikes. Can be really It is what it is. Poor spelling. So where does this poor spelling come out? Usually before reading. Our kids are bright and they learn to compensate. They can figure out just enough from context and just enough from background knowledge or experience that they can read maybe fairly well. But what they can spell doesn't necessarily coincide. Doesn't really. There's a gap there between what we can read and what we can spell. Again, those conventions are difficult. Difficulty learning a new word even after multiple teachings. A skilled reader, after exposure 2 or 3 times to a word, will have that word in their sight vocabulary. So that's a word that you may not have heard before, a term that you might not have heard before, but the sight vocabulary would be all of the words that you know automatically and instantly by sight. Doesn't matter if it's phonetically correct or if it's 3 or 4 letters or 14 letters. If you've seen that word, you know that word and it's in your brain. You can't unlearn it once it's there. A student with dyslexia might take upwards of 30 exposures to have that word in their sight vocabulary, 10 times as many. So think about how that affects that growth of vocabulary and background knowledge that we really want them to have. Word retrieval. Word retrieval. This is, again, something that persists into adulthood. You can have a student who says something close, but not quite exactly the word. Like the little boy who wrote his girlfriend a note and said, "You're my density." How sweet. Or humanity, photosynthesis, metamorphosis, so many words that sound a little bit the same, but, and I can't quite remember them. Or you have a student who can talk all the way around something, explain all of the details about what they want to tell you, but they can't come up with that term, that one word that they want to tell you. Memorization. So, we talked about this a little bit. Math facts become a challenge for our students because, rote memorization paired with trouble with sequencing. And what are math facts? Sequencing. Because to a student with dyslexia, 6 times 7 and 7 times 6 are 2 separate equations. So it's just, and for someone like me who I can't do math, I can do the times tables though. That's not a big deal. All that memorization, no problem. Whereas a dyslexic kiddo might conceptually understand a lot of math, but they're going to struggle to get there because of that rote memorization with those math facts. Handwriting. Now, I'm not an occupational therapist, and not all students, again, with dysgraphia have dyslexia and vice versa. However, something to pay attention to with our dyslexic kids, we're talking about a sequence of strokes that we have to memorize to make a letter. And I have to remember that sequence of strokes consistently. Now, my dyslexic kiddos are going to start from the bottom up. They're going to make multiple unnecessary strokes. They're going to pick their pencil up and put it down several times. You can watch them. Sometimes they get in there and they're just going to will that pencil to do what they want it to do. Handwriting is such a challenge. This is what makes copying off the board, copying off of paper, really difficult for them. When my son was in 4th grade, do we still have agendas, like a daily planner kind of thing for kiddos? Yes? So, I'm getting old. Sometimes those things don't happen anymore. We have so many devices for our kids. So every morning he was supposed to come into school and copy the day's agenda into his planner, and then he had 1 page of math work to do. So that was their morning work. And school at that time started at 8:20, and you could get in the building at 8 o'clock. So we lived across the street. Usually we could hit 8 o'clock, and he wanted to get there at 8 o'clock because he needed a full hour to do those 2 tasks. No wonder these kids are worn out. Really, really exhausted by the time lunch came around. So reading aloud. Reading aloud can be nothing short of painful when listening to these kiddos. They can make a whole host of errors. Some teachers call them miscues. And we have to really peel those apart. We just don't want to add up what our miscues are. We really want to dig in and figure out what might be going on with that. So they guess based on shape. Look at the first letter, figure out if there's a couple short ones and a tall one in the middle, and give it a go. See if it makes sense. Correct sounds with the incorrect sequence. Again, we don't have those consistent letter strings, and we need those. We need to know the exact sequence of letters. So we attend to every single letter when we read. We don't pick up just, there's a thing that goes around on Facebook and it says, a study from Cambridge says that you don't need all the letters. Have you seen this? Yeah, that's not a thing. Cambridge actually had to say we didn't do a study on it. So we do attend to every single letter when we read. And we have, again, that consistent letter string in there, so we do know the difference. Skilled readers know the difference between from and form, and who and how. So we do attend to all of those when we are reading. We just do it so quickly that it looks like we're reading by sight. Semantic substitution, right? So I'm going to use a word that makes sense, doesn't look anything like the word that's there. Dad for father, something like that. Inserting or omitting sounds. Could and cold, steam and stream, especially stream and steam. It could be either, right? Skipping or misreading prepositions. I have my friend whose daughter said flutterby and Zariba. Of course, the mother is also dyslexic. She's been my friend for 25 years. She admitted to me the other day, we're in a book club together, and she goes, oh, I don't read any of those little words. She goes, I just go right over those. So, some of these, again, once dyslexic, always dyslexic. She just reads right over those things. Suffixes. We cannot bother with the suffixes sometimes and still not drop off our meaning, not lose a whole lot of context. And what about the vowel sounds? Who teaches kiddos, very early on, kindergarten, 1st grade? What about the vowels? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, the most common vowel sound in our language is schwa. It's not even a letter. What is that? This is challenging, and we have dialect, and the way we pronounce things is not always consistent with the way it's spelled. Spelling is consistent, pronunciation is not. We gotta throw in a little family circus. We may confuse similar shaped letters beyond 2nd grade. Did the bumps in the beak go towards the kitchen or the living room? I just love that. So again, there's beyond 2nd grade, developmental, right? It's okay for our kids to be confusing some letters and numbers and having some transpositions and things, but we want that to be resolved by the time they're in 2nd grade. Grades 3 through 5 is cumulative, right? We're always going to have some of these challenges, and then we're going to overlay some on the top of them. Difficulty with what we call sight words, those high frequency words. Overly relying on auditory information. So these are your kiddos who don't take notes. They're just listening, 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 because they can't figure out what to write down. I can't figure out what the important points are that you're making. I just have to rely totally on what I'm hearing. Can't retain spelling words beyond the weekly test. How much time do you spend on spelling tests? Practice, practice, practice every week. We get the test back. Did okay on the test, but the next week we don't have any kind of retention. Avoids reading and becomes frustrated easily. We were talking about this earlier. You've got a kiddo who suddenly has a headache or a stomach ache about the same time every week. All ends up in the nurse's office. To pay attention to some of those things. The social emotional piece is really important. Takes an inordinate amount of time to complete written assignments or tests. It's that processing. This is language processing. We just need more time. Dr. Shaywitz, the preeminent dyslexia researcher, said, they have the cognitive capacity, they just need time to access it. I was thinking about this the other day. I'm such a nerd. I was thinking about this the other day. I was digging through a basket of laundry. There's a basket of white clothes, and I was looking for this one white thing, right? And I know it's in there because I put it in the washing machine. And I'm just digging and digging and digging, and I feel like, maybe this is what it's like for these kids. They know the information is in there. They know that piece is in there. They've just got to dig through all the other things to find it. And how frustrating that must be for them. Seems brighter than the written work produced. Isn't that the case? Right? Where you've got a student who could tell you orally so many creative and wonderful ideas, explain their vacation, explain a Lego, something that they built, just the detail that they might explain to you orally, but what you might get in their written work is not going to look anything like that. Written versus oral word choice. They might know, they might have a really nice academic vocabulary, but they're not going to use it because they don't know how to spell those words. Poor recall for testing. My kids are classically terrible test takers. They really are. This is when extra time can be so helpful for them. Difficulty in retelling stories in the correct sequence. They want to give you all the details, not necessarily what those main ideas are. Excuse me. In the upper grades, grammar and punctuation. I think that probably starts sooner than the secondary, where you get a lot of written output, no paragraphs, no capitalizations, decorating with commas, all kinds of interesting things going on. Someone's laughing. This sounds familiar. Writing doesn't reflect their expression or their effort. They have trouble with interpretation. Sometimes these kids are a little concrete, putting that underneath that letter strips. Puns and idioms can sometimes escape them. Paraphrasing, inferences, main ideas versus the details. All of these things that they might understand, again, and be able to communicate with you orally, don't necessarily make it onto paper. Spatially, again, visually, these kids tend to be fairly strong. Three-dimensionally, it's that flat two-dimensional paper that we want them to write on that they struggle with. But again, we've got direction, sequencing, and like I said, we're going to put these kids in cars. So, my daughter's 17. I sometimes say that she's just dyslexic enough to be, good at a lot of things. She's very creative. She's a good eye for things. She's pretty decent amateur photographer, a little bit of an artist, but has a terrible sense of direction. We've lived in the same house her whole life. So outside of the 5-mile bubble, kind of around our house, she has to use her map. So she would admit to you that she's not a very good speller either. So just some things in there to think about. All right, we're not going to have time to do a simulation. Characteristics. Are you for those teachers out there? Are there students in your classrooms that have formal diagnosis? I suspect yes. A few. Are you seeing some characteristics in your students after going through this list? Yes. All right. We're going to have some time for some questions a little bit later, but we're going to talk a little bit about the mandate. So, a little bit of the background on the legislation, which was spearheaded by Decoding Dyslexia. The first round of legislation was in 2014, and so I think when that came around in 15, It went to the governor's desk, but it was not signed. It was part of a huge omnibus bill, and Governor Nixon decided not to sign that bill. So it was reintroduced again in the 15 session, and it was signed in June of 2016. So in the interim, the original bill from 2014 had a requirement that the department hire a specialist, as well as form the legislative task force and then make recommendations to the department. When the second version came around in 2015, that was signed in 16, that language was removed, and the legislative task force was formed by that bill, and then from that, the legislative task force had to make recommendations to the department. So the legislative task force had 21 members, 2 representatives, 2 senators, and then a whole host of other folks from various areas of expertise. Some of them are in the room today. I'm glad they're here. Everybody wave who was on the task force. Thank you. Our charge was to make recommendations to the department on 6 different topics: screening, instruction, professional development, supports and accommodations. I'm missing one. There's another piece in there. We had instruction and teacher prep and instruction. Those were the pieces. Of those recommendations, the department had to develop guidance on the 3 mandates, and the 3 mandates were screening, supports and accommodations, and professional development. So if you go to the DESE website and are looking through some of those things, that informs why the guidance only includes those 3 pieces. Those were the only 3 mandates that were involved. So, and also by statute, the guidance that was put out by the department had to follow the recommendations of the task force. Is this making any sense at all? It's a really complicated process. And even being part of it, which was really an amazing experience, is still a little bit daunting to kind of wrap my head around. So, recommendations are for students to be screened kindergarten through 3rd grade. I think this goes a lot further than some of other states have gone in screening. The ones that there are quite a few states that have mandatory screening statutes now. Most of them are just kindergarten and 1st grade. Some of them might go to 2nd grade, but I think we're the only state that goes all the way to 3rd grade for mandatory screening. Grades 1 through 3 at the beginning of the year. So we want those kids screened, universally screened for the most predictive components of reading acquisition early on. Kindergarten screening in the middle of the year. And we also are encouraging schools to benchmark students 3 times a year, even though they might be on track. We know from the definition of dyslexia that this is an unexpected difficulty, and what we want to make sure we're doing is catching our kids, even though they might appear to be on track with their reading. We don't want any surprises in 3rd grade. So try it 3 times a year. Benchmarking for students is best practice, and that's what we're encouraging. Transfer students who come into the state and have not been previously screened should be screened, and also any student who transfers within the state who doesn't have documentation that they've been screened. Grades 4 and above, by teacher referral or parent request, can also be screened. There is a document. I'm not sure what the next slide is. Oh, we have some exemptions for screening. Those students with existing diagnosis of dyslexia, students with sensory impairments that might be affected by, that might affect their ability to complete the screening. Severe and intellectual disabilities, students with lower IQs, and then English learners, because of the number of ELs that we have in the state, and the difficulty with interpretation of 1st language versus 2nd language acquisition. That makes our ELs a really difficult population to screen. So those are some exemptions that we have. A few things that, for clarification, in that we are screening for risk and characteristics. We're not screening to determine if a student is or is not dyslexic. So it is not the equivalent of a diagnosis. It does not change the special education eligibility process or that criteria. My position is not in special ed. my position is in curriculum. So I sit with the other curriculum folks. I sit with math and science and social studies and EL, arts, ELA. That is the group that I sit in. So this is really an instructional preventative initiative. Again, to determine where some gaps are and where we can address those instructionally, and again, prevent some of these students from later being referred for special education. So it's not changing that eligibility process. It's also not a mandate to develop a 504 for a student. Those decisions are made at the district level, not at the department level. So are there questions about that before I move on? Is there, yeah?
What if your school hasn't done screening yet?
What if they haven't done it yet? Oh my, well.
I just had a 504 meeting today and nobody knew what I was talking about. And I have the site and everybody knew.
Oh goodness. I'm not quite sure. We're going to collect data, screening data, and so at some point the school, they'll have to say whether or not those students were screened. I don't have, we don't have a compliance component right now. So there's not, for those of you who are teachers, there's not a component of MSIP or accreditation right now related to this. I'm hopeful that we can have everyone comply and be on board without that, but at some point that may have to be addressed, within accreditation and MSIP. Other questions? Yeah.
I noticed on the DESE website there are some screenings that are suggested to use, but there's not a standard screening that every school needs to use.
No. So let me see if that. So okay. So if you were to go on the DESE website, because I think sometimes it feels a little overwhelming when you get on the DESE site, and many folks, again, I think try to look for me in special ed. But from the DESE homepage, if you go to educators, click on curriculum, and then there you'll find the dyslexia page. The guidance document, that is what that file looks like. There's a quick links box in the middle of that page, and there are several resources there. And one of those resources is what we call a screening organizer. We are a local control state, which means the department does not recommend, approve, or dictate curriculum. We don't create curriculum or tell you what curriculum to use. That screening organizer was meant to be, again, just a resource of optional tools that are out there that can be used to, that were reliable and valid and had research behind them to kind of assist you in developing that screening process. So you don't have to use something that's on there. Again, there's no list that is approved. And I've had lots of folks call me and say, how do I get on the list? That screening organizer was put together as a resource to just assist you in developing your own process. And then it's not going to be updated. There's no approved list, and it's gone through 2 or 3 revisions and probably won't be revised again. Again, on there's some additional things on the DESE site. PD resources, again, that's part of the mandate is 2 hours. Let me go back just a second. 2 hours of professional development for teachers, paraprofessionals, and instructional assistants. So this is we're recommending that anyone who interacts with students instructionally have 2 hours of dyslexia-related PD every year, starting this year. There's no timeline on that. Just again, it needs to be completed before the end of this calendar year. There are some resources, again, on the dyslexia site, on the page. We've put together 3 webinars that are linked up on the DESE YouTube channel that can be used for that professional development piece, and there's some other things MSTA put together, 4 webinars that they've recorded, and there's some other places where you can reach out. We also have the Regional Professional Development Center here in Kansas City has a dyslexia consultant that is available to do some PD as well.
Can that website be accessed if you're not an educator?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, sure.
When was it available?
I'm sorry?
When was that, those, available to teachers?
The guidance was,
Yeah.
the guidance and the screening organizer were released in January.
Of last year?
This year,
Oh,
January of
yeah,
8, yeah,
okay.
January of 18. Yeah, last school year, but
Because
January, I
because
still can't get onto
my
that.
district's saying that DESE didn't provide anything for 2 hours mediation. And my next question was.
No, the guy, yeah. By statute, the guidance had to be released, technically by the end of calendar year
That was on there
2017.
in January for them to have a
Yeah.
training tool for them. Because I have an email from him saying that DESE didn't provide anything.
So for training or
For training.
for screening?
For training for the teachers.
So the webinars were done, the PD webinars were done at the end of July. So we did one July 19th, one July 26th, and one August 2nd.
They had theirs in August and he said nothing was available.
No. And you weren't required to use the DESE trainings
No,
either.
my other question is that when you said 2 hours for the teacher,
Mhm.
because my teacher specifically, that's why I'm here for her, because she specifically said, I don't recall getting any type of dyslexia training. And when I brought it to his attention, he's telling me she did. And so, as a parent, I asked for her credentials,
Mhm.
and he says that that's like, part of her records, that he can provide that to me.
Right, and at this point, we're not collecting PD, whether they've completed that or not. So we're not going to collect that this year. And again, it's not part of your, but schools are keeping track of that in-house. We've encouraged them to keep track of who has had their dyslexia PD, and they're keeping that in-house. But so I'm not quite sure.
I was just curious to know when this was available, because he was saying it wasn't available, so when
Well,
I get with him, I'm gonna know when it was available to let him know.
So there's, again, the MSTA webinars, they did those early in August, and I believe those are loaded on their website as well, so for continuous access. Again, it wasn't that you were required to use the department,
Yeah.
And you have until the end of the year to do the PD. Other questions?
Can I just make a comment?
Sure.
Our school districts do not want to address dyslexia. You need to hold them accountable.
Well, we'll have to, and the parents, and we're going to rely on the parents to keep this.
I'm here for my district alone, because my teachers don't think.
And that's too bad. A lot of what I did in the presentations, probably for the first 6 months when I was going out and talking to schools, was trying to get everybody a little more comfortable just with the term dyslexia, and that we didn't really have to be afraid of that because we have a definition of dyslexia in state statute.
We can't continue to give our school districts the right to get comfortable with the word dyslexia, because they're taking our kids' educations away every day.
But I think that's because the other part of it is, yes, we have the definition and we know what to look for, but you're not giving anything to help.
Right.
So now I know this child's dyslexic, but what do I need to help them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and getting those
That's the
tools
part
and
that we don't have.
right, and the tools and the training are what needs to happen next. Absolutely, because my experience has been that for every frustrated child, there's a frustrated teacher. And I'm a parent first, so I understand what that feels like. And in doing this work for the last 12 years, we've made a lot of progress. My child's not going to benefit from it. Maybe my grandchild will. I have one of those eventually, but we have to keep the momentum going. We really do, because there are schools that have embraced this and ran with it, and it's pretty remarkable. But I know that's not always the case for everybody. Okay, so we don't have another challenge that we don't of this initiative is that we don't have that intervention piece. We don't have a mandated intervention. So that question about what's next comes up quite often. So I just put a couple links up, and I'm gonna send this PowerPoint. I'll send the PDF version so that everybody can have access to it. But there are a couple slides here that I wanted to link up because they're really useful, I think, in sharing the intervention piece. The Reading Universe is a not-for-profit out of Mississippi that's doing some really nice work, and they're training some of their teachers in structured literacy, and it just, again, is a really nice infographic that goes through the components of instruction overlaid with a structured literacy lens. And then evidence-based intervention, and that is a roadmap that was put out by the National Institutes of Health, so that was one of the grant-based groups that, again, talks about how to evaluate a program and what really those evidence-based pieces are. And I mentioned this earlier, and I wanted to make sure that I talked about this for just a moment, because we have a lot of research, and but we also need to look at evidence. And so that term research-based gets thrown around a lot. What we want to ensure that we're doing is looking at programs that have evidence of effectiveness. So the term research-based has no governing authority, no governing body over that term. There's no regulatory control over that, the use of that term. And so I just want you to be aware of that, the use of that word, and make sure that you're digging a little bit deeper into what the evidence is behind that research. So, essentially, I read a lot of research. I read lots of things. I want to read all the reading research that I can possibly get my hands on. I want to do that. Does that mean that I can go into my basement and like print up some really colorful things and then take them down the street to Kinko's and sell them to you and call them research-based? Yep, that's exactly what that means, because nobody's going to say to me, that's not research-based. There's no governing body that decides that. So when you're looking across the board on anything, we want to have the evidence. If you're going to take a medicine from your doctor, you want the evidence that that medicine is effective for what you want it to do. So just again, be very aware of the terminology. Now, Dr. Kilpatrick is someone that was here in town, and we've been sharing a lot of his work recently, and his kind of thing that he says about research-based is that it just really means buy my stuff. So those are his words, not mine. So, and there he is. So Dr. Kilpatrick, for those of you in education are familiar with John Hattie's work and how transformative that was, I feel like Dr. Kilpatrick did for reading what John Hattie did for education, in that he did a meta-analysis of about 800 research articles, research studies on effective reading programs, and really encapsulated what effective instruction looks like. And it came down to this: to aggressively address and correct students' phonological awareness difficulties and teach phonological awareness to an advanced level. So phonological awareness are all of those prerequisite skills that we have to have before we start layering on letters in print. We want our kids to understand alliteration. We want them to understand rhyme. We want them to understand how to take apart letters and words and put them back together to make new words. All of those skills are core and causal to becoming a fluent reader. And we need to teach those, again, very systematically and explicitly. Provide phonic decoding instruction, again, layering on that next piece of instruction, the decoding, the phonics, and reinforcing it, and then giving kids connected text, getting them into books and getting them reading to reinforce that and grow their vocabulary. That's a short list. I feel like we could, it doesn't seem so overwhelming when we look at it like that. But I think what's getting missed a lot of times in our instruction is that phonological awareness piece. We just assume that our kids have it, or if they have a little bit of it, that they'll eventually get the rest. And that's an assumption that's a dangerous one, because most of those kids that struggle are lacking those skills. So a little bit on supports and accommodations. This is the third piece of the mandate. And there, on the guidance document, there is a pretty exhaustive list of classroom supports. Most of them are very low cost or free, but they fall into 4 general categories: environment, social, technology, and then overarching general. Extended time being really the non-negotiable for these students. They really need that extra processing time to access whatever content they're trying to get at. Repeated review. Again, if it takes me 10 times as many exposures to a word to have that word in my sight vocabulary, how many times do I need to go over a concept or a new math equation or something like that before I have that automatic? Teacher provided notes are always very helpful. Again, my students really struggle to spell and to do their handwriting, so figuring out what the important pieces of that lecture are to get them down on paper can be challenging. Scaffolding, chunking, all things that many teachers do these things automatically. Graphic organizers for those elementary school kiddos can be, and even for the older students, can be really helpful in visually breaking down projects. Oral with printed directions, particularly if something is going to go home with a student to be completed later. And just a little aside on homework and that 20-minute reading that we want our students to do. You know, reading struggles are heritable, and so just like at my house, you know, when a student goes home with 20 minutes of reading or some extra written work to do and takes that home to a parent who also struggles, yeah, we have to just consider that might not be reinforced at home, because there's probably a parent at home that's struggling too. Planners and organizers are great resources. So many kids have devices. We need to access all of the supports that are already built into those devices. That could be helpful for them. We just need to match that with the student. Routine is so very important. Although it's going to take my students much longer to get that routine, we still want to maintain those. Structured time for organizing and transitioning. You know, these kids with processing delays or processing difficulties need that time to finish thinking about a new concept, a new term, new content that they were just exposed to, transitioning to another task. We have so much to do and only a very limited time to do it, and I appreciate that. Teachers have so much on your plate, but just giving those couple extra minutes to transition to a new task is very helpful. Visual supports for spelling, letters, numbers, math. You know, anytime there's an alphabet strip or something on the wall or anything to support those things can be helpful. We want to be very purposeful and intentional about our word walls and our phonics charts and all of those things for our pre-readers or our early readers, so that again, we're explicitly and systematically teaching those sounds and keywords that go with those sounds. That's for a whole nother training. Avoid round robin reading. These kids typically don't want to read out loud. It's embarrassing for them. It can be humiliating. We want to avoid that if at all possible. And opportunities for response that support memory challenges. What does that mean? Well, it means that I might have the content, I just might not be able to come up with the name or the date or the place where that happened. But if you give me the option of this or that, then I might choose. If you ask me where the Declaration of Independence was signed and you give me 2 options, I don't even know what those options are, but if you give me 2 options, I can probably come up with the right answer. But if I have to retrieve that, it's going to take me a while to dig into my file. Technology, we have a wonderful resource in the state. I'm afraid that he's sort of semi-retired now. But Missouri at assistivetechnology.mo.gov is the resource for schools and for parents. They have a lending library of technology tools and funding to help you get some of those tools into your schools. So I would suggest that you reach out to them. They offer, they have online webinars and all kinds of things available. Again, they have a lending library where you can check things out, use them in your classroom, use them at your school before you decide if you want to invest in something. Again, devices can be transformative for our students. Technology can be an amazing resource. We just need to make sure that we're matching the device with the need, or the tool with the need of the child. I think sometimes, you know, hear parents talking like, well, we got an iPad. Okay, now what? What do we do with that iPad? I mean, is that something that's really going to support that child? What does that iPad have that the child can really use? And so we're thinking about it a little bit in the reverse. And who's been trained to use that? Does the student have the training to use that tool or whatever they have? Has the teacher been trained? How can we, as the parent, is the parent in on that as well? So how can we, there are things that are, you know, on Chromebooks and iPads that are already available. We just need to figure out where they are and turn them on. Resources like, you know, audiobooks that our textbooks are online. We just have to figure out where the read aloud option is. Find that button on that page. So there are lots of resources out there. Typewritten homework is a wonderful accommodation. It can be really helpful for older students. To tell a funny little story about typewritten homework. When my son was in 10th grade, he had a social studies teacher that gave out enormous study guides, pages of definitions. And we would sit, and it would take us probably 3 nights to finish the study guide for the test. And so we would sit at the counter, and I would have the computer, and he would have the study guide, and he would read the definitions to me, and I would type them. And then we'd trade, and I would read the definitions to him, and he would type them up. And so about, I don't know, maybe 4 weeks into school or so, we did the 2nd unit study guide and turned it in, and the teacher emailed me and said she wasn't going to accept typewritten homework. And so, you know, my son was 16 at this point, and he was tired of me being the mother bear. Don't talk to my teachers, don't go do that anymore. He didn't have an IEP or 504 or any of those things. And so when she sent that email home to me, I said, all right, what do you want to do? And he's like, you have to talk to her. This is too much. I can't do all this writing. So I emailed her and I said, and we had our private testing done at that point, and I said, Dylan has dyslexia. We spend a lot of time working on this. I assure you that this is his work, you know, this and that. It would be really helpful if you would allow him to do this typewritten homework. And so she said back, she said, oh, I'm sorry, that would be fine. And this was her solution, was for Dylan, for him to choose a font that he would always use to turn his work in so that she would know it was his. Little did I know at the time that this particular teacher was also my 10th grade social studies teacher. So anyway, I think she retired shortly after that. Lovely woman, lovely woman. Anyway, so that's my story about typewritten homework. Let's see here. Social emotional. We've got to watch these kids, and we want to keep them in school, right? We want them to keep coming back. This is a place that is very, very difficult for them and is very, very frustrating. So we want to keep them engaged in any way that we can. Provide opportunities for them to show you what they know, give them positive feedback, acknowledge their effort, even if the outcome isn't all that great. You know, my son worked so hard, gave 110% all the time to bring home maybe C's, maybe. And then his brother was upset if we yelled at him because he got B's. He didn't quite understand. So acknowledge how much effort and how much work they're putting into it, because, you know, that lack of motivation came from somewhere. I don't know a kindergartner or a first grader that doesn't want to do well, or even a 4th grader for that matter, who doesn't want to do well, please their teachers, please their parents. We really need to build them up whenever we can and focus on their strengths. All right, I talked really, really fast. We want to leave some time for networking and questions, but other things that come up that they either have concerns about or interested in. Yeah.
What kind of technologies were you talking about?
Oh gosh, I'm not the technology expert. One of the, I think a game changer for these kids is whatever audio supports we can give them, whether that be, you know, textbooks that happen to have audio or read aloud options. If you have a student that can access audiobooks, I think that can really, again, we have lots of resources for audio that you don't necessarily, you can get audio from the library.
For the classroom though, like you were saying that there's technologies for the
classroom. So if you have Chromebooks, or do you have no? So there are extensions that are built in to Chromebooks that have speech to text options or read aloud options, voice prediction options. So some of those things are built into that tech that you just have to know where to access it. And there are a lot of free apps as well. But again, technology is not necessarily my area of expertise.
UX
check, yeah.
Yes, so you're saying that the school can do those?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yes.
There,
So,
and then-
yeah, they are your go-to at.mo.gov, yeah.
And they would have like, because our school does not have Chromebooks
Mhm.
or anything like that.
They have any number of resources. I know they have the live scribe pens that you can check out. They have different platforms. Again, you can. It's like a library that you can check out. They will train you how to use it and let you borrow it for a certain amount of time before you have to invest. That's probably not answering your question, but they're your guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is this available to all schools?
Yeah. Oh, it's this government agency.
Public and private?
Missouri AT.
Yes.
I'm not quite sure about the private school or the private schools, but they're a government agency. Yeah, any public school would have access to Missouri
Right,
AT
but
stuff.
for private schools,
Mm.
that's what
Yeah,
looking at.
I'm not sure how that works, but it'd be worth a phone call to them.
Okay, and
Yeah.
then picking these items up,
Mm-hmm.
is it like you have to drive to Jefferson City?
No,
Or
they're
is it local?
yeah. Actually, the person who was on the task force is here in Kansas City, so their office is actually in Blue Springs.
Okay.
So Missouri AT is not in Jeff City. I mean, they're there often, but I think they're actually housed here in town. Yeah.
So I know that you have a child or children with dyslexia.
Mhm.
My child was recently diagnosed. And you had a diagnosis, but you didn't have a 504. How did you get the teachers to accommodate you?
And your child's needs, how did you get them to accommodate you?
When he was in so he was in private school for 5th grade and 6th grade. 7th grade, he went back to public school. We had a building plan at that point. And so he was on a half team, so he had the same teacher for reading and social studies, or English and social studies, and then he had the same teacher for reading or for math and science. And so I went in and I talked to them beforehand, and they accommodated him without documentation really. In high school, he put his foot down and insisted that I not do that. So he did high school without any supports or accommodations. Now, I will say our high school was very supportive of kind of differentiating learners. They would have IAs, who would come stick their head in the door and say, "I'm going to go read the test. Who wants to come?" And that was just kind of universal accommodation that anybody could take advantage of. So it was pretty much an open door as far as that was concerned. He didn't really take advantage of those things, but he became a teenager and decided that he didn't want his mom in his business all the time.
Sure. Okay, yeah, we're just having trouble because before the diagnosis I had expressed concerns, but they weren't really being understood or heard. So I paid out of pocket to have a private diagnosis done, and she has that, but now, I'm waiting the process, but it doesn't sound like they're going to accommodate her because she has good academic grades,
Yeah.
but it's due to me spending 4 hours a night.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I think that's something that is a challenge as a parent is to convey
right.
the work that's going on behind the scenes.
Right.
Hours and hours and hours of work behind the scenes. Just again, exponentially more than their peers.
Right.
So and which is that's our bright kids compensating, right?
Yeah.
They just
it's super
manage
hard.
to not look like they're struggling.
Right. Super hard. Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh.
You mentioned earlier that there are districts that have taken it upon themselves to do dyslexia, maybe instruction for their kiddos. Who are some of those districts in the state of Missouri, and how are they funding that?
And how they're funding it, I don't know. I do know that we've provided some training, myself and one of the RPDC consultants to Rolla that we did a half-day training with them. Again, that was instructional half-day beyond just the awareness. one of the larger districts in St. Charles County had all of their teachers trained in a phonics program this summer. Another fairly large district in mid-Missouri had a lot of their teachers trained in Wilson Foundations, and so I'm not sure really where they're, how they're funding that or supporting that, but I know a district in central Missouri that also elected to screen all of their kids K through 6 this year. They went beyond the mandate. So
was that driven by the superintendent or the parents, or you don't know?
I'm not sure. I think
Okay.
it's come from a couple different places. When we went to Rolla, that was the principal who wanted that, wanted us to come and do that. The person in mid-Missouri, the school that did K through 6, they had one of their reading specialists, and she was in charge of curriculum instruction. And she's like, we're going to do this, and we're going to screen all these kids. So it's kind of been a mixed bag of how they've chosen to approach it.
After the screening, what's the typical timeline to get the, because I've been on the DESE side, to
Mm-hmm.
get an intervention letter that goes to the parent?
And after the intervention letter, the help for that student after the screening.
So the question, what's the timeline?
Yeah. What would be the basic timeline for an intervention letter to go to the parent?
Oh gosh, because I don't know when schools are sending those letters out. I have no idea. I would, if they were screened at the beginning of the year, within the first 5 or 6 weeks of the school year, then I would think that an instructional or an intervention would have been started after that was analyzed, after the data was analyzed, which may take a week to sit down and go through all of those, maybe 2 weeks, depending on how many students we're talking about. And then, progress monitoring, again, varies by building or by district, but you're progress monitoring your students every 2 to 3 weeks.
See, that's my, because I know our district did the Ames Web
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning of the year,
Mm-hmm.
but at this point, I know that none of the students have had anything, and I know that my daughter struggles, and I've asked, like, where's the intervention letter? He was kind of clueless to that. And
There's
so,
no requirement that they have to send a letter. Again, it was recommended that they send a letter,
but that was like a month ago, so now I'm like, where are we now?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm meeting with him next week, she still has not gotten any extra. And that's why I'm just saying, after the screening, like, we've had the screening, but that I know of, and I know of a few other students, like, I've actually went to another school in my district that we've not really done anything right now. It's just all been in a standstill. We've had the screening, and it's just.
I think that this is maybe not necessarily, they may have done Ames Web in the past. I think there are a fair number of schools that didn't do universal screening before this year. Or they might have just done, maybe oral reading fluency, or just basic decoding or something like that. So this process is taking a lot longer than they're used to, and I think there's the interpretation piece has been challenging because they don't. That really depends on the building. I think in a lot of districts it will go to Title I, but again that's very building specific. So I had someone over here.
What screens did you use for the different grade levels? So, like, did you use, especially for, say, 2nd grade and 3rd grade?
So the things that were listed.
Yeah, to help them, what screeners did they use?
So, well, I'm not sure what schools were using, but what was listed on the screening organizer, and for 2nd grade, Dibbles, Ames Web, FAST were some of the things that we listed as options for screening. Diagnostics, then we went to a more drill down with the phonological awareness skills test, or the PASI from the 95% group, of course the CTOP if you have access to something like that. So that's a more diagnostic.
And I'm thinking more like when you give that reading CBM and things like that,
right,
you follow the
CBM's
directions on
yep.
it. You just listen to a reading, you make slashes through it. You do not write anything above, below, what they said, what they didn't say. So I guess I'm wondering, how on earth would you possibly know
So that's why you're gonna need multiple pieces. So you're gonna need a phonological awareness screener. If you're just, oral reading fluency will give you errors, and that's great.
Right.
But then if they're making, if they're instructional or intervention, or if they're below frustration with oral reading fluency, then it's time to do something like phonological awareness, do the decoding, letter naming fluency, first sound fluencies, do all of those more diagnostic things to figure out where the breakdown is. You're gonna have to go to the next step for those kids. And spelling, again, spelling can be really informative, especially in those older grades. If you have a student you're worried about, oral reading fluency paired with spelling inventory, if you've got 15 items or so that you can really, again, analyze, that's helpful. Oh my goodness, ah. Go ahead.
What are your thoughts about Haggerty's for the chronological awareness?
Haggerty, yeah. I know that it might not be very popular among the teachers because it's scripted, but I think it has some really nice components because it does teach that explicit and systematic phonological awareness. Yeah.
Coming from a parent side, our school or our district did do the screening, but they never sent out the letters, so parents really don't know if their child was red flagged or not. And as a parent, should I be emailing the principal saying, hey, when are these letters going to be going out, or do I go to?
I'd start with the teacher.
Start with, well, if it's a whole school-wide, nobody has gotten it, or go to the principal first.
Well, I would.
Why does the parents not know? Just coming from PTA standpoint.
Sure.
Talking about it.
That might be a decoding dyslexia question. I think starting with your student, with your teacher, and because that's probably the person who did your screening. Right. I know a lot of schools are not sending out letters. They're going to have their teachers talk about it at conference time. So that might be, yeah.
Okay.
Again, there's no right or wrong way.
Right. Yeah.
But if you're concerned, then I would talk to the teacher. I think that's the first stop.
Okay.
Hold on. Oh, we got one back here. Sorry, someone's got the mic back there.
I just want to clarify. Excuse me, I hope mine look fast. Excuse me after I clear my throat. There's not a set screening device that's recommended, and how are the screeners? Who are the screeners? What's their background in dyslexia awareness? Is that predetermined, or has that been recommended, or is there a requirement for that, or how do we determine who these screeners are?
Who's doing the screening? In most cases, it's the classroom teachers that are doing the screenings. So, and again, the training, it depends on the tool that they're using. So, well, that 2 hours wouldn't be the 2 hours of professional development that you have to have wouldn't be screening specific. That, yeah, that's going to be just your basic awareness, kind of what we're doing here. So, go ahead.
I just wanted to let you know that the iPad was created by Steve Jobs, which is dyslexic.
Right.
So stop and think about that. If your child has an iPad, there is a lot of things that is there that our school districts aren't particularly wanting our kids to know that are there, but they're there. And my granddaughter's figuring them out on her own, but the school is saying no, 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 no. You're giving her a crutch. I'm not creating the crutch. She's figuring it out on her own. And then in the regards of the testing, my granddaughter reads at grade level, but she cannot spell and she cannot write. So when we do these screenings, we have to be really careful that the school districts aren't saying, well, your child can read, because my child is an amazing reader, but she can't write. She only knows how to spell 2 words. That's her first name, and I like you.
Our principal said spelling was a part of dyslexia.
Oh, jeez.
So keep that in the back of your mind, that dyslexic students can be amazing readers.
No, yeah. And to that point, this is a really exceptional story. I've tested a few kids whose reading was at grade level, at least at grade level, and still, had very, very poor phonological awareness, poor spelling, testing across the board. I had a parent call me, again, this on the private side, call me, and she had a 3rd grade son who was in the gifted program, and his reading was at the 5th grade level, so he was reading quite well. And she had him tested privately, And on 3 different phonological awareness tests, he scored in the first percentile. So he was compensating so well that no one was ever going, and at some point, I think at some point it was going to catch up with him. It probably would have been in high school though, when the demand, the reading demand. Think about English 3, you know, and what they're required to read their junior year, and if he's in the gifted program, he's probably going to be taking an AP something or another on top of that, and so the demands were eventually going to catch up with him, but they weren't going to, not 3rd grade. They would not have found that. So it's really important to go to the next level. Absolutely. I've got one back here, sorry.
When my son, I have something to say to the mom back here who has a diagnosis, and then I have a question. When my son, he was in the end of 1st grade, he had already repeated kindergarten. He had done kindergarten again, and by the end of 1st grade, the teacher, we were working with him a lot at home. The teacher was doing tutoring with him, and he was not progressing at all. And she said, I think there's something going on that you need to get tested. I called the district, our school district, the lady who was in charge of special education services. The first thing she told me was, well, I will tell you right now that dyslexia is not recognized by the state of Missouri as a learning disability that gets specific services. So that was when I went to Children's Mercy, because I was actually asking for testing at that point, and that was my answer. So I went to Children's Mercy and I had him tested. You know, check all the boxes. Yes, absolutely, he's dyslexic. So then I went back to the school district the next year, the beginning of 2nd grade. They don't want to say the D word, and they don't have testing for it specifically. They said, well, we can give him our learning disability testing that they give to any kid to see if he qualifies for services. So they gave him that testing. Then we had a meeting with her, and the principal, his teacher, his Title I teacher, the special education teacher, me and my husband. And I was kind of told the night before, or the day before, you need to really be ready to advocate for him. And she wouldn't tell me why. He had, in part of the testing they'd given, he'd done poorly at one point. Well, then they retested him in that area, and he did well, which if you have dyslexic kiddos, you know sometimes they do really good, and then other times they totally bomb out, and it doesn't make sense. She had the power to deny services to him. And so she said at that point, one of the reasons that he got services was because of a slow processing speed. But still, they wouldn't talk about dyslexia or what specific to dyslexia he needed. Luckily, he had a special education teacher who educated herself. And she took the time herself to learn about dyslexia and to learn how to teach him and how his brain worked. And he has come so far at the end of 2nd grade and last year in 3rd grade. And I have just fallen all over myself. I mean, I don't even know, there's no way to express my thanks to her and to all of you teachers that do that go above and beyond and educate yourself beyond what your school district will do to educate you because you care for those kids. And so for you may have to go to the school and ask for that testing to be done for their own, because there's laws connected to that testing that they have to give your child certain services. So that comes to my question, with this mandate, is that now, does that change the first thing that she told me so that now they have to give them services due to a dyslexia diagnosis?
No. The eligibility process remains what it is. So if you have, and again, that's not where I sit. So nothing about the eligibility process changed. You know, in 2015, when the United States Office of Special Ed released their guidance letter that said, yes, you need to acknowledge dyslexia, you need to talk about dyslexia and dyscalculia when you're doing your IEPs. When you have a private evaluation and you take it to your school, just like any other private evaluation for ADHD or anything, that school, they have to consider that diagnosis. Eligibility is determined by those tests that they give in the school. And those tests don't lead to a diagnosis, they lead to an eligibility determination. So that process does not change with this mandate. Ideally, what we should be doing is screening our kids for risk predicts whether or not they're going to learn how to read or not. We need to be screening our kids. We need to, and with good core instruction, small groups, and tier 2 interventions, get these kids on track to close the gap so we don't have them being referred for special ed. This is, I do not want to see these kids in special ed. It's not where they. Sorry?
Are they mandated to do the intervention?
No.
So
But
what's the
that's
point of screening if they're not mandated to do anything about it?
I think something will happen this year for that.
So that is, so
We'll talk
basically,
about that in a little bit.
The decoding dyslexia folks will talk about legislation.
So they can deny a 504 plan or an IEP plan even if you have a diagnosis?
Yes. You have to meet eligibility.
Yes, they have to test for it.
You have to meet eligibility.
Well, like I had my daughter tested.
Mm-hmm.
I forced the test from them for the learning disabled
Mm-hmm.
program. She got denied, and I went to take her to get tested, and she is dyslexic.
Mm-hmm.
But that isn't.
But if they don't.
It's not considered a disability.
You have to qualify.
They have to.
You have to.
Basically have to bomb out on their test.
Eligibility.
Their grade level to qualify.
And
She didn't meet
the discrepancy. Yeah. Go ahead.
The school district will say that the child has a low IQ and then they don't need to service them.
And if you're concerned about the way your schools are handling the eligibility process, if they were not discussing dyslexia and all of those things, call the department, call compliance, call special education. That's what those folks are there for. That's what they are there for. If your child is not being serviced, again, that is their job, is to investigate those things.
I have a question here.
Oh, sorry.
So I'm here as a parent and a teacher.
And a teacher, thank you.
And the most eye-opening thing about all this is that I didn't know anything about dyslexia, and this is my 19th year of teaching, until I had a kid who is diagnosed with dyslexia. And through Children's Mercy, we did the whole thing. We tried vision therapy. She's had 2 years of tutoring, with our reading specialist, and she has come so far. She's reading on grade level-ish. And she's got the gamut. She's got dyscalculia, dysgraphia. She's got it all. So she is in the SPED room. She qualified through RTI for reading, and straight up qualified for math. But it's so hard to hear the struggles of parents, because I know that. But what parents don't understand is that we are not educated as teachers. We really aren't. Like, we do the best that we can, and like I said, I don't know. I feel like I'm in my building the dyslexia whisperer now, because I can be like, they have it, they have it, they have it, they have it. I can, if you know what to look for, it's so easy to see, and it's so obvious, but we are not educated, and we're not allowed to say the D word, so.
Well, we're allowed to say the D word.
Right.
You're allowed.
Right. It's just frustrating.
Oh yeah. Thank you. It is okay to say the D word. Along the lines of teacher training, the part of the funds that we had at the state level to provide some OG training was spent on, and anybody who's been around education for a while might remember this from 2003-4, when the Reading First legislation, and there was a lot of grant money that came into the schools. And so part of that money went, all the money went into the RPDCs to create specialists, dyslexia specialists in each of those areas. We have 10 on a team. And then a portion of that money also went to pay for those consultants to have letters training. And so we are doing letters training right now. We're in units 1 through 4, so it's the first half of the letters training, and we're finishing up with that right now. We're going to have 2 days of training with Dr. Carol Tolman, which is the co-developer with Louise Motes. We're going to have 2 days of training with her in November. We'll have 2 follow-up days in December, and then the RPDCs. Again, you're here at UMKC. RPDC, Heidi will be a credential facilitator and be ready to deliver that training to anyone who's interested in January. Okay.
Like those of us who are here as teachers or reading teachers in districts, talking about that type of training,
We haven't, right, we haven't posted any of those things, and all the RPDC trainings are on My Learning Plan. So, mylearningplan.com is where they post all of those things. And then once if I have for the educators, I have an Edmodo page, and that's a platform where we're alert when we can post some different things. And then I'm also, of course, I'm going to have to make a big announcement celebration on the DESI page when we finish our training to announce that we're ready to start providing those.
What was the page for the teachers?
Sorry?
What was the page for the teachers?
Edmodo. It's EDMODO. Edmodo.com.
That was I was going to ask. Like for DESI, who's to advocate for the teachers? Because that's like I said, I have teachers coming to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like with Title I, it's like, hey, well, while you're in there, ask about Title I. While if you're going to talk to him, because it's almost like like me, like, hey, when you go to the boss and say this, and I'm like, well, I ain't afraid of the boss, so I'll go say whatever. So, and that's why I said, who's there to advocate for the teachers, like for them to speak their voice without having to have repercussion that they spoke up to the boss.
Mm-hmm. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Me?
Right, because I have excellent teachers. My daughter's had excellent teachers. She's in 3rd grade, and the last 2 years, I mean, and I was throwing her names all over the place. I was like, she has, but I mean, she's still behind them.
I can be that person. I mean, this is all about good instruction. Good instruction. We don't have to have 35% of our kids are dyslexic, firstly. And we can get almost all of that reading on grade level earlier with good instruction. I don't want this to be a SPED discussion. I want us to not have kids in SPED. Please.
I have a burning
question. Oh, comment, please.
I guess I just wanted to give a big shout out to all the people that worked so hard on getting us to where we are.
Oh, absolutely.
And I can imagine as a parent, my child is now 25, I have a similar story that Kim has, and the natural feeling for everyone in the room must be the screening has happened, now what?
Mm-hmm.
And so, the fact that we got the mandates through, the mandate is not for intervention, it's for support.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you said, we are going to hear more about where we're going forward. If it's not happening now, if I was you as a parent, I would be feeling the same way of what I'm hearing in the room.
Sure.
But stay with it and go to your schools and keep on top of it. But a lot has happened in the last 5 years, and a lot of work has gone into that. And I just want to thank all those people that have done all of that work. And I just can't wait to see the success.
It's never going to be fast enough.
It won't be fast enough.
But
it's a lot of work, and a lot of people are really, really trying. And stay positive. Do what you can on your end of it. Support, band with other parents, and go to your school and demand appropriate instruction, even if it's not mandated yet. But don't
we actually do have
an
age-old statute. We really do have an age-old statute that talks about explicit and systematic phonics and phonemic awareness instruction. And it's in there. I don't have a mandate mentality. I don't really like the fact that we have to argue about best practice and shove it down people's throats.
And I really want to say one other thing about audio supports. As somebody that I deal with teachers and with parents, one of the first things that I educate them on, ear reading is equal to eye reading.
Yes.
Reading is for knowledge, reading is for entertainment, reading is for language and vocabulary and grammar. And so when you get a teacher that doesn't understand that and thinks that somehow audio supports are lesser than a child eye reading, you need to educate them on that. And there's some great graphics out there that you can use to educate your teachers about how important that is.
We all take in lots of information auditorily. The majority of our information auditorily. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think we probably need to make this the last one because Dee has it.
Is there any focus on people, the colleges that are training all the new teachers that are coming out?
Isn't that the So we were able to do a little bit of work with higher ed earlier this calendar year, and in the requirements for coursework, you know, there's a list of things that are, you know, that you should take as a pre-cert teacher, and we were able to kind of reorganize those a little bit so that they at least included the terminology of phonological awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and all of the, we were able to put those 5 big components in there in a way that they're at the top of the list and not at the bottom of the list. Particularly for like elementary, I think, you know, the list, it started with children's literature. Who doesn't want to take a class on children's literature? I want to read kids' books all day long, but that didn't, when it was up at the top like that, it looked like that was the most important class that you needed to take, and that got put down a little bit further on the list, and we really tried to focus on those components. How that fleshes out at the university level, I'm not quite sure. That's a challenge that that is consistent nationwide.
UMPC offers a course on dyslexia.
They do.
Graduate level
Yes.
course.
Yes.
So for teachers doing extra, like CEUs, it's a great course. I'm an instructor for the course, teaching the course. So if you have teachers that want to know more about dyslexia and need CEUs, UMPC offers the course. But every year I have teachers, and these are reading specialists and teachers getting masters and reading scholarship degrees and effect degrees, and they say they have not had any instruction in dyslexia before now. And every undergraduate teacher that I actually took UMPC currently offers at the graduate level.
Yeah, and part of what we'll have to entertain at the department level is creating a certificate and outlining what that might look like. Put that on the to-do list. But there are also Reading Rockets, which is on the resource list. So Reading Rockets is was a website that was born out of that National Reading Panel, and it has a 10-module self-paced teacher reading certificate program. I don't know what exactly to call it, but it's a 10-module program that will give you all the background to prepare to take the CERI exam. And the CERI exam is the Center for Effective Reading Instruction exam. And those knowledge and practice standards are based on the International Dyslexia Association knowledge and practice standards. So that's free and available to anybody who wants to take it. And that's another list of, primarily for educators, places that you can find really nice resources. Florida Center does amazing work. One that's not on there, yeah, CERI, the effective reading is there. Intensive intervention, NCIL is a dyslexia-specific organization that was born out of READ Act money that President Obama signed in. So those are some resources good for parents and for educators as well. So, all right, I'm going to hand this off. Thank you.
Well, let's give Kim a big round of applause. Thank you so much. That was great information. We appreciate you guys coming. We're going to have, Amy's going to give a little talk about the upcoming bill, but definitely continue to follow us on our webpage, our Facebook, Decoding Dyslexia Missouri, because we need all of you to help us continue this momentum that we have going right now. But Amy's going to kind of tell you what's ahead of us with legislation.
I don't know if that was me or not, but we'll try. Yes, I'm Amy Hallquist, and I'm a member of Decoding Dyslexia Group. I just wanted to give you like a short, brief update on the bill. We kind of talked about how, you know, we've worked really hard on getting what Kim was talking about, the screening and the education and the task force. That took a lot of work from our group to get it all going and to get it passed, and it was a great feeling to be able to get that kind of a start for these kids that have had nothing for so long. So yes, you had the great question as, yes, now we have the screening, but now what do we do with those kids? You know, what do we do with these kids now that we've identified them with a deficit in reading? So that's kind of the next step towards this. So there is a new bill that has come up. It's Senate Bill 949, but it'll be given a new number when the new session starts back up. So it'll be under a new number. But that bill, if you want to go read, look that up and read it, that would be great. But it does going to be providing a evidence-based research or evidence-based program for these kids. So not the research-based, it'll be the evidence-based for all these kids that are not reading on level. So that's our goal for next year. We go back into session, and usually in January, we did it in February last year, but we do Dyslexia Day on the Hill. So we all take a day, and it'll be posted on the website or on Facebook, the Decoding Dyslexia Missouri group. If you can follow them on Facebook, Twitter, online, any of that, and we will have information regarding that. We haven't set up the day yet, but it'll be usually in January or February. We take a day and we go down and we meet in Jeff City, and we talk to our legislators, meet with them, and try to push for this bill. So obviously we need everyone's support, to help get this to pass. So if you can work with us and follow along, and there'll be time where you need to send letters to your legislators and do that, there's times if you can go down there, if you're a parent, if you can take your kids down there that day, it's a fantastic experience for these kids to go down to the Capitol, take a tour of the Capitol, meet with their legislators, and tell their stories. And even with these bills, you can tell your story. Again, they ask for kids to come down and give their story, and they can come down and talk to the legislators, and tell them, their story. And I'll tell you, they do a fantastic job at listening to the kids, and it's a great experience for them. So if you can just kind of help support, follow along with that, then hopefully by next year we can have another law kind of mandate come into effect. So that's our goal for that, so that now we can treat these kids. But again, it's just patience. It takes a long time, and as we said, the school districts, it's all left up for them, to make up to find what screeners they want to use, what they want to use for interventions and everything. So, but again, we've talked about not having the education, so we have to educate the districts, then be able to provide all the good, instructions that they need. So it is a time consuming and patience and just trying to educate as you go along. So, but that is the little legislative update, so just know that there is a new bill coming out, and so please help us endorse that as much as we can. So I think that Megan has a few comments as well.
Yes, I am just going to say a few words. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for coming out. It is just overwhelming to see the response that we've had in Kansas City this year with our events and everything. And, we talked about a lot of things today, but I just want you to leave with the idea that Missouri is a local control state, so the work lies with us as parents to go back to our districts, to go back to our school boards and educate them. Educate everyone. Say dyslexia. Tell the mailman, tell your doctors, tell everyone, because there is still this huge barrier of people not knowing what it is. I mean, when we look at the numbers, we see it's here for everyone, to know about it, but a lot of people just really aren't getting that information. So that's our job. What can you do when you leave here? Say dyslexia. Tell everyone. Tell your neighbor. Tell your mailman. You've got to spread the word, because at the end of the day, it comes back to us as parents. We have to keep fighting for our kids. The teachers are out there, they're fighting for 30 kids in a classroom. The principals are fighting for 500 kids in a building. At the end of the day, we've got to do it as parents and just keep at it. It can be daunting, I can tell you how many times I've cried in the bathroom because my kid is struggling, and it's overwhelming. But we've just got to keep getting up, get out there every day. Join our Facebook group. There's power in numbers. You want to connect with other people on the same mission as you. If you join the group, you can meet other parents in your district, form a plan, because those are things that you can do to take action and try and make a difference. I want to give Kim Stuckey a huge thank you for coming out and educating us today. All the teachers who came out, and administrators and parents, you get the biggest hand
of all, because we're the ones living it every day. And thank you so much, and be sure to, follow up with us, stay on the web, sign up on the website, and let's get this bill passed when it comes back around. Thank you.